In August 1975, the state admitted in Montgomery Federal Court to cruel and unusual punishment in the state's prisons. It resulted in the 1976 ruling by U.S. District Court Judge Frank Johnson, Jr., requiring the prisons to meet a long list of minimum constitutional standards for inmates. Johnson also threatened to order the prisons closed if standards affecting virtually every area of prisons operations were not met. The Federal Court of Appeals last week upheld most of the 1976 order, but it also struck down some of Judge Johnson's findings, which were based on the 8th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The appeals court dissolved the 39-member Human Rights Committee, which Johnson created to oversee the implementation of his order. It's to be dissolved in 30 days, and in its place, the court has recommended that it be replaced with a single monitor for each state prison. The court questioned the broad range of authority given by the committee, whose members had no expertise in corrections. Said the court, prison officials cannot be expected to perform in an efficient or an effective manner if they are required to stay in line with so numerous a committee and at the same time constantly be confronted with the specter of federal contempt of court. Relative to meeting minimum constitutional requirements as outlined in Johnson's order, the Fifth Court of Appeals said if the state furnishes its prisoners with reasonably adequate food, clothing, shelter, sanitation, medical care, and personal safety, so as to avoid the imposition of cruel and inhumane punishment, that ends its obligation under the 8th Amendment. The appeals court also noted that Governor George Wallace should be removed as a defendant in the case. Wallace, a harsh critic of the prisons and the federal courts, has no hand in the operation of the prisons beyond the budget recommendations to the legislature and appointing Board of Corrections members. The appeals court said although Johnson's effort to reform Alabama's prisons merit high commendation, the district court, in a few respects, went impermissibly beyond the requirements of the federal Constitution. There has been no official comment from any of the parties involved in the court ruling. Apparently, all want to study the appeals court ruling a little further. George Mitchell, WSFA TV News.
The judge ruled that the hearings would not be open. We intend to take that to the Alabama Court of Civil Appeals.
You are going to appeal his decision?
Oh, yes, of course.
Now, the lawyers for Mrs. Wallace asked that the hearings be made public. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
What about the motion to recuse?
He has not ruled upon that.
Did he give any indication as to when he would act on the motion to recuse himself?
He said within 24 hours.
You are going to appeal the public hearing decision. Would you say it for again?
Yes, we will. We will appeal it.
I have another question. Could you give us any indication as to what was discussed in this hearing here that we ran for about 45 minutes?
Well, witnesses took the stand, and we questioned witnesses. One witness was Judge Davis's father. One was his father-in-law.
This is in the motion to recuse?
Yes, and that's all that really went on at the hearing other than arguments at law.
Could you tell us what kinds of alimony Mrs. Wallace is asking?
No, we can't talk about that, Norman. Some things are not ready to talk about yet.
Could you?
Roy Johnson.
Mr. Johnson, could you tell us what happened here a few minutes ago?
Well, we were up at the bridge, second bridge behind us here, and the plane looked like he was coming down, but it was getting pretty low. But still, it wasn't too obvious that he was coming down. And it looked like he sort of leveled off as to when it got right up over us. And then it got on down this bridge immediately behind us and touched down and really made look like a good landing. There was not that much room on each side of the wing tips. It didn't look like. But it looked like he made a real good landing there.
How many people was aboard?
One, yes.
Did it appear that he was having any kind of trouble landing here?
Well, I mean, not knowing anything about really about planes, I couldn't tell really where he was having any trouble or not. You know, I mean, trying to judge that part, I couldn't, you know, really say.
Any workmen in this area at the time?
No, it wasn't right in this area. It wasn't anybody. It was on up the road here a little ways, but well, I don't think there's anybody right in here. In fact, whenever we saw it touch down on the bridge, we got in our carry-all and came back down this way, and so we really didn't see right in this particular area at the time because we got in the carry-all just as soon as we could and came on back down this way.
Did he appear to be hurt, the pilot?
No. He went on, they said he was going to Danley Field and couldn't get him on the radio, and he had to go over there.
What did he say?
Well, that was, he said it seemed like they must have got the fuel line mixed up and or something about the fuel, but said he lost power and had to come down.
Judge Davis' order was issued about an hour ago at 11 o'clock, and he has decided that he will hear the case. The 36-year-old Montgomery judge who was appointed to the judgeship by Governor Wallace before he ran for the office and was elected to the seat has said that he finds no reason that he should not hear the case. He has also denied a motion that the proceedings between the Wallaces be made public. I have here a copy of the judge's order, and I will read part of it. He says that the court finds that the ground alleging a long, close, friendly relationship between Governor George Wallace and the trial judge, his father, and his father-in-law is unfounded and doesn't constitute cause for recusal. He also says that the fact that the trial judge's father medically treated the party, George C. Wallace, in 1971, does not constitute cause for recusal. The judge says that he has stated under oath that he is unbiased and is able to fair and honestly try the Wallace case on its merits. It is the opinion of the judge that there exists no appearance of impropriety for this judge to preside over the case. In fact, Judge Davis says in his order, there exists the danger of the appearance of impropriety if the judge recuses himself. So Judge Davis will hear the case, and the proceedings will not be heard in public. Attorneys for Mrs. Wallace have said that they will appeal decisions by Judge Davis to recuse himself and decisions by Judge Davis not to hear the case in public. So there may be some hearings before the Civil Appeals Court here in Montgomery. We'll probably have more on that at the 6 o'clock report. Governor George Wallace filed an answer to his wife's allegations this morning, just minutes after Judge Davis decided to hear the case. And the judge answers that he did not attack his wife. She had alleged that he committed violence upon her. United Press International reported yesterday that George Wallace attempted to choke his wife twice and ran over her with a wheelchair. Today, Governor Wallace says in his answer that he is denying the allegation contained in Mrs. Wallace's motion and that he has never committed any violence on her or any cruelty whatsoever. He also says that he has never threatened his wife. Mrs. Wallace, in her divorce petitions, has said that she was afraid for her health and safety, and those were some of the reasons that she moved out of the mansion a week ago. He also says that his wife is not without funds and that she can pay her lawyer's fees. Mrs. Wallace has said in her divorce petition that she does not have money, that she spent her money while she was with the governor, and that he did not pay her bills, and that she cannot pay her attorney's fees. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News, live from the Montgomery County Courthouse.
Good evening and welcome to Composite. On this week's News Magazine program, we'll find out what makes a television newsman tick. We'll also see renovation at the state capitol, the latest in men's fashions, and find out how to get to Selma, Alabama by way of India. Your host on this week's program is Clark Edwards.
Well, let's take a look at that new newsman first. He's Lloyd Dobbins of NBC News in New York. Dobbins has developed a very successful new format. It's called the magazine. In fact, it's the most successful in the industry. Most people, however, know Dobbins as he's introduced to the nation this way.
Good day, here's some news.
Where is the magazine concept going to go?
Well, Reuven Frank, the executive producer of Weekend, and I have talked about it. We think, don't know, that the magazine concept probably will become the major news source on television. It is a popular form, whereas hour-long or 2-hour or 3-hour-long documentaries have generally proven to be rather dull and incapable of attracting an audience no matter what they're worth. Where news magazine programs tend to attract a far larger audience because they know if they don't like the first piece, then maybe they'll like the second or the third or the fourth. But you can keep the program moving, you can get more information into a shorter time. News magazine programs in the last few years have become quite successful. Well, as you know, anything that's successful tends to get copied. So I think that's what will happen.
What about the topics? As little as 5 years ago, Weekend, for example, the show we do, Composite, we have dealt with subjects we wouldn't begin to have tried. Does simply calling it magazine give us a different attitude, or is it the audience, a reaction?
No, it's the audience. The audience has changed. I don't know exactly how. I do know that it started, if it can be dated at all, in the late 60s or early 70s. People became more willing to deal with subjects that prior to that they would not even discuss among themselves. And it has gone on from there to the point now that if the subject is seriously done, and I don't mean boringly done, but done with a serious intent, I don't think there's a subject left that you couldn't handle. It would be difficult to think of one.
What about interesting versus important?
Well, that came up. That's a thing Reuven and I talk about a lot. We have gone back to the concept of interest. No one of the field producers has ever come into the office and said, we ought to do this because it's important, because they know they'd get thrown out. But they come in and say, we ought to do this because it's kind of interesting. I care. And we go on the basis that if it interests one of us, it must interest somebody else as well. None of us is that unique. So if it's interesting, we do it. If it's not, we don't. It seems to work.
Who is Lloyd Dobbins?
5-foot 10-inch guy from Virginia who works in television. That's
Seriously, who is he?
I don't know. It's a question that I intentionally don't answer. I know what I'm doing and why I do it. I am what I appear to be, and I don't care a whole lot. I have a lot of fun.
Some of the remarks that you make on Weekend, one of them I see in stationery in the Watergate Hotel gift shops, for example. But you can shoot rabbits.
Yeah.
Where do those things come from?
Usually at a bar somewhere on about the third drink. Just things we think of, things that occur to us. It's something we do.
Is there a reason behind it?
Yeah. The bumper sticker, what we call verbals, the little sayings that come up, there's a definite technical reason for those. If we didn't have those, then I would have to say, I'll be back after this message, which is monumentally boring, or we'll have that in a moment, or one of those phrases that we can all sprout, you can do 12 of them in 5 seconds. Well, we thought you've got to let people know that the commercials are coming. You don't want to say the same thing everybody else says. You don't want to go to a bumper slide that says, "Isn't Weekend wonderful?" So let's do something that will serve two purposes. One, it will get us into and out of commercials. And two, it'll give everybody something to hate. And therefore they can like the rest of the program. So that was the original intent of the verbals.
Would you, for our audience, tell us the whole quote?
Bureaucrats breed like rabbits, but you can shoot rabbits. It didn't make us terribly popular in Washington, but then we rarely are anyway.
The concept that you have begun with Weekend, there have been a number of other magazine shows that really haven't been very successful. Weekend seems to be going into its fourth season. Seems to be. How is Weekend different from others?
Well, we take a different view of things. For instance, we have our prime rule is interesting is more important than important, but the secondary rule we have is we don't cover news that is otherwise adequately covered. So we tend to find stories that other people haven't seen or haven't touched, at the risk of seeming more egotistical than I am. The first program on television that said that the KCIA was operating in the United States was Weekend. We found that one while we were doing a story on the Reverend Moon, which no one had covered before we did. But because we know we can't just pick up a newspaper or watch other programs and see what news to cover, it makes you go out and search for stories that are interesting, that are kind of different. And for their own reasons, the people seem to like it.
Would it sustain itself on a nightly basis?
No, no. For a peculiar reason, you wouldn't have the time. You couldn't get the production technique in. Weekend is a very small unit, happily well-financed, but a very small unit. As you begin to increase the size of your unit, you begin to lose control of the unit, and it begins to go in various ways. I think that would kill it. I don't think we could do it on a nightly basis. We might be able to do it on a weekly basis, but even that would be iffy.
Let me switch now to another show that you do quite a lot, Today Show. What about getting up at 5 in the morning?
It is despicable, but not nearly as despicable as the other end of it. I have always been a night person. I like to stay up late. My wife and I like to go out to dinner in New York. And the idea of going to bed at 10 o'clock, you're almost ashamed of it. You don't want anybody to know that you really do that. You know, I would go to bed at 10 o'clock and I kept waiting for Mommy to come tuck me in. You know, it's ridiculous. 5 o'clock you can get up. You just force yourself. You say, Lloyd, you must get up and you must go. But going to bed at 10 o'clock is probably the worst thing that ever happened to me. It's just horrid.
Who are your heroes?
In what? You know,
Do you have a hero?
No, not really. There are many people I admire for what they've done. For instance, I admire Willie Sutton. He was a marvelous bank robber, really good at his trade. He never hurt anybody. But in journalism, no. I have no hero. There are people I admire for what they did, what they were able to accomplish. But no, I don't have a model that I try to be. No. Yeah, I probably could go out. You know, Clark Kent's nice. You know, I've always liked the cape thing.
Cape thing.
People laugh at you when you know put it on, so I don't do that much.
I always was amazed at how you could change in a phone booth. I never would mess with that.
Well, in some of the New York phone booths, you can't even make a call, so you might as well change. I mean, the phone doesn't work, so might as well use it as a dressing room as anything else.
And so it goes. I'm Lloyd Dobbins, NBC News.
Do events on the other side of the world have an impact on what you wear in Montgomery? We'll find out in a moment. Italian menswear designer Antone Franzoni says that world pressures like war and peace do have a direct effect on what you wear and what you buy for menswear here in Montgomery.
Whether it's right or not, when we walk into a room, the first projections we do project is through our clothing. It's just a visual image. Fortunately, later on, if we establish a contact through a conversation, you know, that first image may disappear. But why risking? You know, so many young men are playing it safe. You know, they wear a conventional, traditional suit when they are in the market for a job because they want to play it safe.
Did you notice, for example, during the Vietnam War, the establishment people were wearing dark suits and everyone else was wearing something else in the 60s?
Yeah, that's very true, and has happened quite a few times in the recent history. And also, it's what happened, for instance, while you mentioned Vietnam War, I remember immediately after World War II, for practical reasons, most men were trying to save, well, it was a rule and regulation, a government rule, to save money, I mean, to save cloth So the clothing that men were wearing at that time were skimpier. They didn't wear cuffs on the trousers. They didn't wear vests. No double breasts in order to save cloth. After World War, you know, the clothing were so abundant, just as a reaction to that stingy period that most men went through. So social events and major events, to a certain extent, influence our fashions.
Unisex started very loudly and brilliantly, and then became trapped in the sporting goods section.
Right, and I think that's where it belongs, because well, I may myself, I didn't try it yet, and I may not, but I may consider the idea of trying to wearing, for instance, a tuxedo and going out with my wife, and she would wear more or less the same look, a tuxedo look. But that would be valid for one evening only, and that would be a gimmick, you know, not really a look. I think we like to be different, and ladies look well in what they are wearing in most cases, and we look well in what we are wearing in most cases. And I think that we should be different.
Are European men becoming more American in their tastes, or Americans more European?
I think there is an overlap of fashions today. Europeans are wearing a tremendous amount of jeans looks, so very definitely sportswear is influencing the Europeans. In conventional clothing, in traditional clothing, in what I'm wearing today, for instance, definitely so the American market has been influenced by certain European looks. However, I would define what we are wearing today international.
When people wear it, it's called fashion. When buildings wear it, it's called a facade. Sometimes the facade is only plaster deep. It needs some help in getting itself together. The Capitol Dome is in such a state. Dave Rickey has the details and some pictures on that.
Dave, the Alabama Capitol is one of the most historic in the United States because this was the cradle of the Confederacy and where the Confederate States was formed. And Jefferson Davis took the oath of office right in the portico here. The Confederate Constitution was signed, prepared and signed in the Senate chamber, and the Confederate Congress met in the House chamber of the Alabama State Capitol.
What about some of the history of the dome itself, some of the years maybe that are significant?
Well, the dome was built in 1851, as was the main part of the Capitol, and then wings were added in 1885 and two after the turn of the century. The dome is the highest form of Greek revival classical architecture, and the capitals on the dome, those that are up here on top of these columns and those that are in front of the Capitol, are the Tower of Winds order, which is part of the Corinthian order for capitals, one of the three basic Greek revival types.
What about the inside of the dome?
Inside the dome, you have the murals that were painted by Roderick McKenzie in 1927 through 1930, and then the gold leafing was added during the Depression era.
But now there seems to be a problem. What is the problem now?
The problem is that there is extensive leaking and is threatening the murals, and there's also a great deal of rot, which is destroying precious architecture, as well as is really wasting a lot of taxpayers' money because it's rotting away the wood in the very foundation of this upper area.
So what is the Historical Commission planning to do about it?
Well, the Alabama legislature appropriated $2 million to the state of Alabama and to the Historical Commission to restore this first part of the Capitol. And the Historical Commission appointed Malcolm Macmillan, an esteemed historian from Auburn University, to steer the committee. And then Jim Solomon and many others are involved with Nicholas Holm, the architect from Mobile, who has the technical supervision.
But $2 million is not going to be enough to cover the whole renovation, will it?
No, what it will do is it will restore the dome and will restore the central core of the rotunda, and it will also replace the rotted wood that is on the windows and the doors, and it will begin the electrical systems, the electronic devices that our lawmakers need to continue to use the Capitol.
How long do you think that this first stage will take to complete?
I think it will probably be completed in 18 months or less. And each time we get our plans and specifications and advertise for bids, and we proceed with the next step.
When will this first stage start?
The first stage will start as soon as we can advertise for bids, and we have some technical problems to clear up, but they should be cleared up by the 10th of October. And then the advertising for bids could take place, and then the work could begin 30 days later.
After this $2 million runs out and the first stage is over, how are you going to go about trying to get more funds appropriated?
We're going to, of course, have to turn to the legislature for the bulk of the funding. And while it will take an additional $5 million to restore this capitol, or approximately that amount, well, I think we need to remember that if we built a new capitol, it would take at least $15 million to build this building again. We would have a building that would be new and it would be attractive in some ways, but it would not appeal to tourists. The capitol already attracts 150,000 tourists a year, and when restored, that number will increase, and so it'll add greatly to the economy of the Montgomery area and in the entire state of Alabama. So we're going to ask them to restore the capitol. Now, this history, the Confederate history, is very important, but also the civil rights history that took place here in the mid-1960s. We're standing in view of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. In addition to this, we've had some very colorful governors who served the state, and many men in the legislature went on to the United States Senate and became nationally known in the political field. And this will appeal to so many visitors. The architecture and the history will appeal to them, and we feel we also ought to do it for posterity, because we feel that the youth of Alabama need this capitol. People of all races and creeds and people of all nationalities need to be able to come here and see government function. This should be a viable and workable facility of government, not a dead museum.
There aren't any trains or trolleys between Bombay and Selma, but we'll talk with a couple who made the trip anyway in just a moment. Some people can take a lifetime to go from the south to India. However, the Pyreeks made the trip the other way around, from Bombay, India to Selma, Alabama in only a few days. However, it may take them a lifetime to adjust to us. Ivy Berman has a report. That's Composite for this week. Join us again next Saturday night for another look at the people and places that, taken together, make up a composite look at ourselves.
We hope that you'll join us next week with your hostess, Ivy Berman. Composite is a presentation of the News and Public Affairs Department of WSFA TV and is pre-recorded for broadcast during this time period.
The place is infested, it's filthy, it's infested with all kinds of insects and stuff. And the food, when they bring it up, really it's not worth eating. You asked to see a doctor up there. Well, I stayed up there for over a month, and I asked to see a doctor, and I ain't seen one yet. Well, there's an inmate, William Gates, who is confined up there now. Has been stabbed in his heart 8 times, and he is, I've heard him request myself to Sidney Thrash and the jailers, Robert McCall and Frank Greer, that he needed to see a heart specialist, that he was seeing a heart specialist when he was in Correctional Institute in Florida. He needed to see a heart specialist because of that condition, and they just refused to let him see one.
What would you be doing if you weren't here today?
No.
Are you glad to be back to Head Start? Are you?
Yeah.
Can you tell me why you're glad to be back?
'Cause if I be at home, I'll be in the street playing.
That's all you'll be doing? What do you do when you're at Head Start?
I'll play in the dark corner, eat, drink my milk, look good for me. And I play with toys, I lay down on the cot. I learned how to write. I learned how to come to school.
You mean you learned how to come all the way up here by yourself? Really? What else?
I know how to know my ABCs. I be playing and doing some eating. I be eating, playing. I'll sit down. And then my mom come pick me up.